with that, guys, we'll go ahead and get it started. So quick outline on what we're going to be covering today, guys. First thing we're going to talk about is risk communication. Specifically, we're going to talk about what do we mean when we say risk, or how is that term used. We're going to talk about flood risk in particular, how much are we talking about, and then who communicates that risk to people. We're going to delve a little bit into the flood maps and floodplain management. But the big portion of the webinar, guys, is going to be that third bullet point, the flood risk communication tools. The whole point of this is I'm going to talk about some of the flood map tools out there. What can they do? How can they be used? And then actually going to do live demonstrations of a couple of them. So the Map Service Center, Firmat tool, Risk Map portal, and the FEMA Map updates portal. We are actually going to do live demonstrations of. So you can actually see what these look like, how they can be used, and where all your buttons, bells, whistles, and things like that are. So when we talk about risk, what are we talking about? So risk is the probability of a loss or an injury resulting from an incident, event, or occurrence. That is the technical definition of a risk, but the term is actually used in a couple different ways. There are two main components of it, though. The first one is there has to be a threat, or there has to be a hazard. There has to be, something that is going to cause that incident, event, or loss. And then there has to be a consequence. So if that incident happens, what is the result? What is the outcome? Those are the two main components. When we say risk, though, it's generally used in one of two ways. So it's either defining what is at risk. So saying, that house is at risk of flooding. You can also say that area is at risk of flooding. Or identifying the probability of that unwanted event occurring. So, for the NFIP, it's a 1% chance flood event or flood risk. Something like that. That's generally how risk terms are used. And to give you guys an example of what I was talking about there has to be two components of risk. The first big one is the community assets. So there has to be something there. There has to be something that can be at risk. So this would be populations, whether it just be general population or a vulnerable population. Some type of built environment is generally found there. Parts of your economy could be affected, or even natural environment. So if you have logging operations or something like that, there has to be some kind of asset that can be at risk. And then the second portion is there has to be a natural hazard. So where does this hazard happen? Earthquakes are more probable in California and along the New Madrid Fault than they are in other areas. So where is it happening? There has to be an extent, so a magnitude or a strength. How big is it? How big of an area? Were there any previous occurrences, and what's the future probability of those? When you have community assets but no natural hazard, there's really not any risk. What's to damage it? Vice versa, if you have a natural hazard but no community assets, what are they going to affect? Nothing. It's only when those two overlap together is when you find risk. When we're talking about flood risk in particular, though, the big question we have to ask is how much flood risk? What level of flood risk are we willing to accept that is sufficiently low so that we as society are comfortable with it? Everywhere is at some level of flood risk, but what level are we comfortable with? When it comes to floodplain management and the NFIP, that risk level is defined as 1% chance or greater flood risk. So we regulate areas that have a 1% or greater chance of happening, greater than a 1 in 100 chance of flooding in a given year. So when it comes to that risk, one of the key factors with it is being able to communicate it to people in the general public. Risk communication, its primary goal is to supply lay people with the information they need to make informed, independent judgments about risks to their health, safety, and the environment. For people to take action to protect themselves from a risk, they have to be aware that it exists. If you don't know about the sparking wire in your attic, how are you ever going to go up there and fix it? You need to know before you can take action. only about 1 out of 4 people are actually aware of what their flood risk is. And that could be, a varying spectrum of those people that do know. That could be just, oh, I know it floods there, or they could know what the flood elevation is or what zone they are. But, like I said, there's 75% of the population in general that aren't even aware of what level of flood risk they have. With risk communication, though, locally, the big thing is it's a public safety program. Like I said, you really are putting tools in the hands of people so that they can make informed decisions themselves. So whether that be social media campaigns, advertising that, hey, it can flood here, this is something that can happen, or advertising for flood insurance. Whether that be putting up signs for flood hazard areas or high water, road underwater during rain events, things like that. Promoting the Turn Around, Don't Drown campaign to inform people that, hey, driving through a flooded road is a dangerous aspect. Or the picture all the way there on the right is actually an example from Paducah, where they have high water marks just on the side of the building as you walk around downtown. Even though it's behind a flood wall, you can still see where some of those previous high water marks are. And it really puts into perspective what that risk is. So there's a variety of ways you can communicate flood risk, but really the key goal is, putting the tools in the hands of the people so they can make that decision themselves. So back in 2013, FEMA actually did a risk survey. They were curious to find out what people know about their flood risk, how was it communicated, things of that nature. And what they found was people overwhelmingly prefer local media sources for their flood risk information in general. 81% of the people that responded listed local media as one of their primary sources for getting risk information. That is a significant number. And when we say local media, realize we're not just talking about TV or newspapers. That can also be things like local websites, or Facebook and Twitter, from community officials, from neighbors, things of that nature. They prefer to hear flood risk information from people they trust, from people they know. Also with the survey, they found, like I said before, only about 1 in 4 people responded to actually looking for flood risk information, which means 3/4 of the people out there have no idea what their flood risk, or don't even know that they are at risk to look for the information. And they also found that when there was frequent communication with people, there was a greater people with frequent risk communication is associated with greater flood risk awareness. And when you're aware of a risk, you're able to take action for it. So some of the actions they found, people who said they were aware of their risk, 48% actually said they raised their hot water heater or their furnace or something like that. And about 1/4 of them actually purchased flood insurance to protect themselves. So, putting these tools out there for people is really important, and it really does pay off with, better awareness and mitigation actions. So for you all that are out there as local community officials, there's a lot of you out there that actually deal with flood risk, whether you realize it or not. So elected officials, when floods happen, people look to you for help. They look for information, aid, assistance, and direction from elected officials anytime a flood event happens. FEMA, there's a quote that says, this expectation is more evident in every new emergency as Americans increasingly look to their government to be their guardian in times of disaster. People are looking for help, and the elected officials, they elected you to lead them, to be that person. For those of you who are local floodplain coordinators, part of your job and duties as the coordinator is to do risk communication, whether you realize it's risk communication or not. So some of the ones would be education and outreach, actually talking to people about flood risk, doing development determinations or floodplain map determinations, letting them know, hey, are you in a high or moderate or low risk area? As they do, permits, notifying other agencies that, hey, this is happening, so that they're aware of other things that might be going on. Anytime you issue a permit, you're basically telling people, hey, you need to do these things to protect yourself. And then when people either, violate that permit, or whenever they, just don't get one, issuing stop work orders to let them know, hey, stop, slow down. We need to address this issue before moving forward. All of those things, whether you realize it or not, are communicating risk to people. For any of you guys that are online that are CRS communities or that are interested in being CRS communities, there's a whole series of the CRS program that is specifically geared towards providing public information to people. So whether that be doing elevation certificates, outreach, hazard disclosure, flood insurance promotion, things like that. MS4 communities, there's the whole part in your permit about public education and outreach. So notifying them, hey, MS4 is for stormwater, but stormwater is just water that hasn't got to the stream yet to be a flood. So by taking action for your MS4, you're actually promoting that for flooding as well. And then any emergency managers on the line, whenever you're providing emergency information during any type of disaster response, whenever you're closing roads, whenever you're providing evacuation route information, things like that. All of that is providing risk risk communication to people. Oops, apologies. So when it comes to this, guys, there are tools out there that really help. When you're looking at a map or something like this, it's really hard to tell people, hey, you're in an area that's at risk of flooding. That is a fairly small stream. People tend to think it's very inconsequential. Oh, I've never seen the water get up this high in the 20 years I've lived here. Well, maybe not, but a flood can still happen. So by providing them information with, hey, everything in blue on this map, this is high risk area. Oh, wow. Okay. So this is something I need to be aware of. So really what we're talking about today, guys, are really going to be the floodplain maps and how they relate to our, floodplain management programs. One of the legs of the stool, there are four main pillars that kind of go into the NFIP, which is the National Flood Insurance Program. One of them is flood identification and mapping. We need to know where our high, moderate, and low risk areas are. So when it comes to floodplain maps, there are several different reasons why they're important. So number one, like I said, they show you where high, moderate, and low risk areas are. And notice it says low risk, not no risk. Anywhere it rains, it can flood. It's just what is the probability of that happening? It might be low, but it still can happen. You do have larger than expected floods that come down. You can still have downpours that result in flash floods in areas that aren't mapped in floodplains. About 1 out of every 4 flood insurance claims in the NFIP actually come from outside the identified floodplain. So when it says low risk, it doesn't mean there's no risk. So it really does communicate what their risk level is. Floodplain maps are also used for floodplain management decisions. So whether that be at the federal, the state, or the local level, determining what can be done, what actions need to be taken to protect yourself from a flood event, things like that. That's what the maps are used for. Lending institutions, they actually use them to determine when flood insurance is required with a mortgage. So are you in a high-risk area? If you are and you get a federally backed mortgage, flood insurance is required. So they use the maps to determine are you in or are you out. And then flood insurance agents themselves actually use the maps to rate your policy. So what's your flood zone, what's your approximate base flood elevation, things like that. So there's a lot of reasons why flood maps are important to the program. A lot of people use them, so we want to make sure they're as accurate as we can make them. When it comes to the tools, guys, there are a lot of them out there. I'm only going to cover a couple of them, but realize, I'm a floodplain manager. I'm going to talk about the flood risk tools, but there are other ones out there. For example, USGS and the University of Kentucky's Kentucky Geological Survey, they have tools out there specifically geared towards earthquake, karst topography, landslides, things like that. There are other ones out there, but like I said, we're going to primarily talk about flood risk, but there are a bunch of tools out there. Okay. Abby, do we have any questions or comments come in so far? Okay, so no questions yet. So guys, we're going to move on to the second portion of the webinar. This is actually going to be the demonstration portion of it. So I'm going to talk specifically about those 6 tools that we mentioned at the beginning of the webinar, one by one. And as we go through and I finish a topic, I'm actually going to show a demonstration. So we're actually going to go online and do some of the things that these tools are able to do. And the first one we're going to talk about, guys, is the Map Service Center. This is a website from FEMA, or that is managed by FEMA. The Map Service Center is FEMA's online digital library of all of their flood hazard products for the entire country. So if FEMA has it and it's flood hazard related, it's on this website. So you can go on there and get the flood insurance rate maps for your community or for certain areas that you're interested in. You can go on and get the flood insurance studies, so the background information about why the maps look the way they look. Those are available for download for your communities. Anytime the maps are found to be inaccurate or need to be changed, so you can go and get the letters of map change that FEMA has issued saying, yes, this property's in, or no, this one's out. And then you can also get the non-regulatory products that are for risk communications in there as well. When you go to the Map Service Center, you can actually search a variety of different ways. You can search by state, county, city, street address, or lat long to find the area you're interested in. And the website there in the bottom left is msc.fema.gov/portal. The image there on the right, this is what you get when you go in and actually search for our community. But again, we're going to go into a demonstration here in a minute, so I'm not going to cover that too much in depth. So some of the products, whenever you go to the Map Service Center, the big one that everyone is probably most familiar with are the flood insurance rate maps. These are the official legal documents regulating the floodplain. These were sent through a due process phase. They were noticed, they had an appeal and comments period. They were officially adopted into all the local floodplain ordinances, things like that. So these are the official legal documents we use regulating floodplains. Whenever they're put together, they're made using best available data at the time. They are considered perfect until you prove them wrong. So even if you think, hey, I don't think this is right, I think I'm actually outside the floodplain, the maps are still going to be used to make decisions until you update it. So whether that be through a letter of map change or a LOMAR or something like that, the maps are still going to be in use. FEMA is the one responsible for putting together all the flood insurance rate maps for all the communities in Kentucky. We at the Division of Water are a cooperating technical partner with FEMA, so they provide us funding, and we put the maps together on their behalf to their standards. On the flood insurance rate map itself, there are several things you'll notice that are being shown. The number one thing, though, is the 1% chance or greater flood event. This is the regulatory floodplain we talk about. This is the special flood hazard area. This is the area where permits are required, where flood insurance is mandatory if you have a mortgage, things like that. Those are shown on the map. In AE zones, which are those high detail study areas, you can also find base flood elevations, and you can see the regulatory floodway on the map itself. That's actually shown on the maps. In addition to that, you can also find community landmarks. So this would be things like major roadways, large bodies of water, corporate boundaries for the edge of your city or county, things of that nature. The floodplains, like I said, shown on the flood insurance rate map are the areas where development is regulated. So if you're in that area, permit is going to be required if you're going to build or develop. The other document, like I said, that's pretty key when you go to the Map Service Center that a lot of people look for is the flood insurance study. So the maps look the way they look, but why do they look that way? Well, the flood insurance study is the background information, the background data that tells you how the maps got to that point. So it talks about areas studied, it talks about the summary of discharges for certain streams, It talks about the engineering and mapping methods that were used on the map, the flood elevation profiles, floodway data tables, things like that. All that information is in the flood insurance study. It also provides you additional references for what was studied. So again, it tells you what was used and how it was used. And then the main thing that I tend to point people to the flood insurance study for is, if you're in an AE zone, the flood insurance study has the base flood elevation up and down the streams that are mapped as AE zones. Those are actually in the back of the flood insurance study. I'm not going to go into how you calculate the BFEs in this webinar. That's actually planned for a future one. But that information is in the back of the flood insurance study. So if you have problems, if you have questions with that, please contact me. Again, my information is going to be at the end of this presentation. So some of the key functions that the Map Service Center does include, showing you or allowing you to view the flood maps and the data associated with it in a digital format. So rather than having paper maps panel that you have to organize, this is all in a digital format that's very similar to how mapping services such as Google Earth, Google Maps, Bing, things like that already use. So you can go online and actually see the effective date of panels side by side, panel numbers, where letter of map change determinations are located, things like that. You can also go and download all this information. So remember, this is FEMA's online digital repository. So this is how they store and provide that information to people. So you can go on and download the effective maps, the ones that are being in use today. In addition to that, though, you can also go back and download things like the historic maps. So if you have older structures and you need to know what maps were in use at the time it was built, you can actually go back and look at the map that was in use then. Anytime the maps are in the process of changing, you can also look at the preliminary or the pending maps. Those are available there as well. And then, like I mentioned before, the flood risk products, you can download those, and we'll talk about those in a little bit. So we did have a question come in before I move on to the demo. It says, how would you go about proving that the firm maps are wrong? The most common way this is done is using an elevation certificate. So basically proving that the structure or the ground that was used, or the ground elevation, that was used when the maps were put together was inaccurate, or providing more accurate information than was used. Elevation certificate is the best way to do that. Other ways you could do that would be, you could hire an engineer and have him remodel the stream to show any changes or something like that have been done. So we've actually had communities that remapped certain of their streams after they did large stormwater improvements or something along those lines. But there are several different ways you can do that to show that the maps are wrong. And once you have that information, you can turn around and provide it to FEMA with an application requesting that they change the maps. Okay, that was a good question. So we're going to move on, guys, now to the demonstration. So we're actually going to take you into the Map Service Center and show you how it works. So whenever you go there, this is what you're going to see. Welcome to the Map Service Center. The first thing I want to call your attention to, guys, here in the center of the screen is actually this search feature. You can search on here, like I said before, with an address, a place, lat long, coordinates, whatever you want. For this example, we're just going to look at Frankfort, Kentucky. Frankfort, Kentucky, type it in and hit search. And it's actually going to take us to the area we're interested in. So you can see there at the top, search results, products for Frankfort, city of. If we go down to the bottom, you can actually see the map itself. So you can actually see the corporate boundary of Frankfort. You can see the different map panels there. Those different green boxes that you're seeing, those are actually the map panels themselves. The beautiful part about using the Map Service Center versus the paper maps is on areas where the panels touch, you can actually see the maps connected, whereas with the paper panels, sometimes you had to go back and forth between the two to make decisions. So it makes it much easier for everyone to view and view the map. Additionally, on those green panel boxes you're looking at, you'll notice there's green writing there in the center of them. What that is that's actually the panel number and the effective date of that panel. You'll notice each panel has an independent, unique panel number. So this is 108E, 109E, etc. Each one is different. And then it tells you what day did that panel start being used. So for this example, it's December 21st, 2017 was when this map was updated last. So you're able to actually go and take a look at those and see them. Or you can go back and look at the older paper maps if it was something from before that time. When it comes to zooming, guys, there's a couple different ways you can do it. If you're familiar with Google Maps or Google Earth at all, you can zoom using the scroll wheel on your mouse, or here in the top left-hand corner of the map, there's actually the plus minus button that a lot of people are familiar with. So you're able to actually zoom around, toll around, click and drag, similar to other map services that you're used to. Whenever you first go there, you'll notice that it shows you your background is actually an aerial photograph. But there are other options. So sometimes this is not helpful to people when you're trying to find your location and you don't have a lat long or something like that. So you can actually go here to the top right-hand corner and click that street map button, and it will show you the floodplain maps overlaid over street maps. If I can get it to toggle for me. There. So now you can actually see where the streets are, what the street names are, things like that. This is a useful feature whenever you're trying to figure out what area people are talking about. Below the maps, one of the things you'll notice, guys, is this is the legend. So this is the different information telling you what the different symbols on the map are talking about. So these areas here in blue or in the blue and red hash mark, that's our special flood hazard area. That's the 1% chance floodplain that we regulate. If you're building, if you're developing, if you're demolishing anything in that blue area, permits are going to be required. Additionally, that's the area where flood insurance is going to be required with a federally backed mortgage. Some of the other symbols you see on the map, though, so this gold beige area there on the edge, this is denoting what they used to call the 500-year floodplain. Now it's the 0.2% chance floodplain. So this area doesn't require permits, doesn't require insurance. It's just shown on the map to show that, hey, you have a moderate level of flood risk. It's not a low risk. It still can happen. Bigger floods can and do happen, but it's still there. The other major one for Frankfurt that you'll notice, so this this gold with the gray hash mark through it, if you come to your legend and look, this is areas that are protected by a levee or flood wall. And that's what Frankfurt has. Downtown, it actually has both. It has a levee and a flood wall. So the areas that are being protected by that, if something would happen to the levee or flood wall, these areas would flood, but they're not treated as in the floodplain for flood insurance purposes. They're just on the map to let you know, hey, moderate risk area, floods can still happen here. Some of the other symbols you'll see on the map, apologies. My computer has a mind of its own at the moment. You can actually see the cross sections on the map. So cross section R here. What this is they actually had somebody out in the stream surveying the stream, and that area we know in very high detail. In addition to that, anytime you have a cross section, you'll also have a base flood elevation associated with it. So at cross section R, the base flood elevation for this spot is 509 feet above sea level. If we move upstream a little bit, cross section S, same way, we know the flood elevation there, it's 509.3. So you can actually see how it changes up and down. Whenever you go to your flood insurance study, these cross sections are identifying markers to help you figure out where on the stream you're at. Zooming out a little bit, one of the things you'll notice, guys, is that red pin there in the top left-hand corner of the map. What that is that's an area I selected. And you'll notice that the panel is actually shown highlighted in blue. So as I click around, different panels will light up. So you're actually able to select which panel you're most interested in. So you can actually look at that one in particular. So if you know, hey, I'm only interested in this one area and I don't care about anything else, you can actually select that panel. And if you go just above the map image button, you can actually download only that one panel. Simple enough. To the right of that, you can also see areas where there's been any changes to that map panel. So have there been any LOMARs? Have there been any LOMAs, amendments? And were there any revalidations? So we can actually click that and download the letter of map amendment for that map panel if that's the only one we're interested in. Now let's say we are community officials and we're actually interested in everything. So if I'm working for the city of Frankfort and I want to look at all the maps, both the effective and the historic, there's actually a button for that as well. So just above this, near where the search results there's a button that says show all products there on the right side. If you click that, it's actually going to open a new page that is going to show you all of the products that are available for City of Frankfort. So you can see here, again, search results for Frankfort City of, there are only 3 of the 5 folders lighted up. That's because there are no preliminary or pending products for this area. The flood maps were revised not all that long ago, so they're not currently being restudied. But if there were, you could click those as well. In that effective products folder, you can actually open that up and see the different firm panels. So for Frankfort, there's 11 different panels that are being used. You can actually go down and look at them individually, download them, view them, see where letters of map change are issued on those panels, etc. You can also download, like I said, the flood insurance study for this area. So for Frankfort, there are 2 with different information in them. You can look at the letters of map change. So for this one, there's 1 LOMA issued for City of Frankfort. You can go in and take a look at that. And then you can also download the state or county data that are for the effective products. Down below, you'll notice there are historic products available as well. So FEMA on the Map Service Center has all the maps, all the flood insurance studies available all the way back to the beginning of the program. So here for the City of Frankfort, we can actually go and scroll down a little bit, and you can see maps ranging from the late 70s all the way up through 2013 for the historic products. So you can see Frankfort had several different revisions of their maps as more information, more detail, more technology is incorporated. The maps have been updated accordingly. But we can actually go back. So for example, if we have a map from 1985 or a house from 1985, well, looking at the historic products, we can see at that time the maps from 1981 were being used. So we can look at this index panel, the IND on the end, and actually see where in the city that house is located. From there, we can go down to the appropriate map. So there were 5 or 6 of them here for 1981. Find the appropriate map and look at it in more detail. So you can look at maps all the way back to the beginning of the National Flood Insurance Program on the Map Service Center, which is a great tool to have for permitting purposes. And then the last one I want to talk about, guys, are the flood risk products. So anywhere where we've gone through in the last 3 to 5 years and done new mapping services, we actually have enhanced products available that are specifically geared to risk communication. I'm not going to talk too much about these right now. I'm going to cover that in a couple slides, but they are also available under that Show All Products button there on the Map Service Center. And so that's it for right now. We're going to circle back to this here in a little bit when we start talking about the Firmat tool. But does anybody have any questions? If you do, please send them now while we're on this into the chat feature. I'm happy to answer them while we still have this pulled up. Okay, it doesn't look like we had any questions come in, so we're going to go ahead and move on, guys, to the next one. So the next tool I want to talk about is the Firmat tool. So when we're talking about the flood insurance rate maps, remember, these are legal documents. They went through a due process phase, they were advertised, there was an appeal and comments period, they're incorporated into your local ordinances. They are official legal documents. They're used to enforce the floodplain management decisions. When you look at the paper firms, this is what they look like. So this is actually downtown Lexington. If you guys have keen eyes, you'll notice this white box here is Rep Arena, to give you an idea of how big of an area we're talking about on the flood insurance rate map. So when we're talking about these panels, though, they're fairly large. They're big enough that the average person can't do anything with them. They're usually anywhere from 2 foot by 3 foot or 3 foot by 3 foot. So unless you have access to a plotter, the average person can't print and use something like these. So they're also can be difficult for communities to make copies of. So again, every community gets a set of the flood insurance rate maps when they're produced. But if they're lost, if they're damaged or something like that, they're hard to make copies of. So it's very difficult to do that. So we as floodplain managers, we as flood map users, it can be sometimes difficult for communities and citizens to use these during an application for a permit or for an elevation certificate or for a letter of map change, something like that. So to help combat this, FEMA's actually put together what they call the Firmat tool. This allows you to, instead of trying to print the whole 3 by 3 map, to just print the section of the map you're interested in instead of the entire panel. So then you can actually take that map and provide it for applications, letters of map change, things like that. And then insurance agents, realtors, lenders, they can use those as well, since they're readily available. The key with this versus just a screenshot of the maps is that it includes all of the legalese and the legal language needed to be a regulatory document. So rather than just an image where you don't know what area is north, you don't know what scale is, you don't have a legend, things like that, there's no note to users, the Firmat actually includes all that information. So it's still part of the official legal documents then. The Firmats have changed over the years. This is what one of the original Firmats looked like. Very black and white, difficult to see where you're at. Everything in blue, though, or what we used to call a blue blob, that's the floodplain. That's the area where you regulate to. The new maps are significantly more user-friendly. So instead of just the edge of the panel being there, you can actually see a red line right through the middle showing where 2 panels meet. So you got the one on the right is panel 128D, and the one on the left is 109D. So you can actually see where those 2 panels meet versus just one panel or the other. There's an orange pin there in the center showing you where the area you're interested in. It has a legend on the right-hand side showing north arrow and what all the different flood zones are. It has notes to users and things like that. So all the information, all the things you need for this to be in a legal document are still available on the Firmat. So these are great. To give you guys an example, though, of how significant this is. So the one on the left, this is actually a Firmat of an area here in Frankfurt. And the panel on the right, this is actually the effective map for this same area. And to give you guys an example of how much better this Firmat is versus just the map itself, one of the things you can notice is, both of these red circles are approximately the same size. So both of them are actually showing the same area, and you can see how much of it is being excluded from everything else. Guys, we're getting a little feedback. I'm trying to keep everybody on mute, but please be sure that you have your lines muted as well as we're going through this. So the Firmat's great because it excludes everything except just the area we're interested in. And again, it has all the legal information, the legend, the notes to users, things like that, that make it very user-friendly. Okay, moving on. So some of the key features that the Firmat tool allows us to do is, one, when those maps are created, they're actually in PDF format. So they're very user-friendly. It's something that a lot of people are familiar with, and it allows you to very easily print, save, or email those maps out to people. So depending on what you want to do with it, it allows you a lot of functionality right off the bat. Additionally, those PDFs are only just a subsection of the map, and they print on 8.5 by 11 normal-sized paper. So if you have access to a printer, you can go ahead and print one, or again, you can just email it to somebody and they can print it themselves. It's an official legal document, so it includes all that regulatory information that is needed for the maps. And then the beautiful part is FEMA has actually included this tool on the Maps Service Center webpage. Previously, it was a completely separate process, and for some of the older maps, it's not as user-friendly, but the new ones are great. You can simply get them by going just straight to the Map Service Center. Okay, doesn't look like we had any questions come in, so I'm going to go ahead and move on to the demonstration on this one for the Firmat tool. So like before, we are going to go back to the Map Service Center and take a look at Frankfort, Kentucky again. So once again, Map Service Center welcome page, we're just going to type in Frankfort, Kentucky, and just do a search. Simple enough. And just like before, it's going to take us to the area we're interested in. It's going to show us all of Frankfort. For this one, though, we're going to do something a little different. So now we know an area we're specifically interested in, and we want to print a Firmat. So how do we go about doing that? First thing we've got to do is we're going to find our location. So I've got an empty lot that is in downtown Frankfort that I'm interested in. Bear with me while I get there. Okay. You can see here just to the left of Capitol Avenue, right by the river, there's an area in the floodplain and floodway, that I'm interested in. If I wanted to print a Firmat for just that area, well, all I have to do is just simply click on that area, and you'll notice that red pen moved from where it was to the area I clicked. So this is me telling the Map Service Center, hey, this is my area of interest. From there, all we have to do is scroll up, and on the left-hand side, you'll notice that dynamic map tool. Underneath it says print map/print Firmat. Click that button, and it's going to open a new web page where it's basically saying, please wait, a map is being generated. Now, don't panic when you get to this. This sometimes can take anywhere from 30 seconds to a minute for the map to open up. Since this is a webinar, I've actually gone ahead and already created one, and this is what that map looks like for the area I clicked. So you can very easily see there in the center that orange dot of the area I'm interested in. And again, all the information I want. So in the top right-hand corner, I can download, I can print, whatever I want to do with this map, that's available to me now. So if I want to apply for a permit, whether I want to get a letter of map change, whatever, I have a map that I can print off and take with me and show and talk to people about. And that's it. It's very simple, very straightforward. It's 2 buttons and you're done. So even people that aren't really all that technologically inclined, this is something that they can do. FEMA tried to make this as simple and as user-friendly as possible. Still doesn't look like we had any questions come in, guys, so I'm just going to keep trucking along. So guys, again, if you do have problems, if you have questions, please use that chat feature in the bottom right-hand corner and send it to me, send it to the group, and I'll try to answer it as I go. So moving on from the Firmat tool, the third one I want to talk about is the National Flood Hazard Layer Geodatabase. This is the third and final map tool I'm going to talk about today that's managed by FEMA. This one, it essentially allows power users of these flood maps to bring the effective flood map data into your projects. So for anybody on the line or anybody on the webinar that actually has ArcMap or GIS software, this allows you to bring the flood map information into your projects and use them. So information such as the firm panel information, letters of map change, LOMAs, LOMARs, where are they at, base flood elevations, streamlines, and more. You can see from that picture on the right, there is a ton of information that is included in the National Flood Hazard Layer. Some of it doesn't necessarily apply to Kentucky. It's more for coastal users, but all that information is there. It works with any GIS software, so whether you have a local install of ArcMap or you're using ArcMap online, doesn't matter. It can work with both. The beautiful part about the National Flood Hazard Layer, though, is that the data is all managed by FEMA. So rather than you having this data stored locally on your hard drive, your C drive, or stored on a local server or something like that, what the National Flood Hazard Layer does is FEMA manages all that data for you. So they can automatically update it as time goes on to make sure you have access to the most up-to-date maps available. So it allows them to update the maps every night at midnight. And then when you log on to your ArcMap project the next day, you have the most accurate information. So anytime new maps go effective, anytime the maps are changed through a LOMA or LOMAR or something like that, you have access to that immediately the next day. You can actually go to the Division of Water's Find Your Flood Zone page to learn more. There's a little bit of a write-up there for you. In addition to that, guys, we put together a viewing and using digital flood maps guide that is available. It's also available on that Find Your Flood Zone webpage. So you can go there and actually download the guide, and there's actually a step-by-step process for how to add the National Flood Hazard Layer into your ArcMap program. Since this is an introductory webinar, I don't want to go too much into it because, again, the National Flood Hazard Layer tends to be for people who are more power users of the maps instead of more for the introductory ones. So I'm not going to go in and show a demo on this one, but like I said, if you want more information, it's out there. Get a hold of me. I'm happy to help provide it to you. Okay, moving on. It looks like we had a question roll in during that webinar. Is there a requirement for pre-approved sign-in or login registration for access to the Firmat information? There's not. You know, FEMA is a public organization. You know, anybody and their brother can go on there and actually get that information. There's no login, no restrictions, anything like that. So you can actually post that information to websites, and people in the general public can go on there and access that information as well. Okay, guys, moving on. So now we're, you know, the first three maps we talked about were actually ones that were developed and managed by FEMA. Now we're going to switch gears a little bit, and we're going to start talking about some Kentucky-specific map tools that are out there. The first one being the Kentucky Flood Hazard Portal. This is one that is put together by the Division of Water to make Kentucky-specific flood maps available to anyone in the Commonwealth. So when you go to the watermaps.ky.gov webpage, it's going to look something like this. There in the very top left-hand corner in that red box, that's going to be where the flood hazard portal is located at. So you're actually able to click there and go and take a look and see it. Some of the beautiful things that the flood hazard portal does is that it shows all of Kentucky floodplains on a single map. Whereas the Map Service Center is all of the flood information for the entire country nationwide. So, you know, we're not interested in Arkansas or Alaska or Florida necessarily. You know, me being in Kentucky, I'm primarily interested in floodplains in Kentucky. So this actually shows you just Kentucky-specific information. The other major tool that we built into the Flood Hazard Portal that FEMA's Map Service Center doesn't do is we provide A-zone base flood elevations. So I mentioned before when I was talking about the flood insurance study, AE flood zones, you can find those base flood elevations in the back of the flood insurance study. But when you get out into the more rural parts of the counties, that information wasn't necessarily readily available. You know, you had to go and actually calculate it. Whereas the Flood Hazard Portal, this actually will just provide that information to you automatically. So all you have to do is go in and find the area you're interested in. So in that picture in the bottom right-hand corner, you can actually click the stream center line, and you'll have a results box pop up that actually provides you the base flood information for where you clicked. This information can be used for elevation certificates, for permits, letters of map change. This is the information from the effective models that are shown on the map. And again, we're managing this data for you. There's not a whole lot you have to do. The only time the Flood Hazard Portal doesn't work for A-zones are going to be in areas where there's sinkhole flooding. On those, you do still have to contact us directly, but for anything else that's a stream in an A-zone, you can actually get that information yourself automatically today. You can also download information that go into the effective models. So you can download the hydrologic and hydraulic reports for that stream, and you can also download the effective model. So what the model we used to put the map together, you can download yourself and actually modify that model for any changes you want to make. So for commercial developments or for subdivisions or things like that, that are going to, you know, maybe relocate a stream, that are going to put stream crossings in, that are going to fill areas, you can actually go in and model and see what those changes are going to do to the flood elevations before you ever do any work. And those are available for download today from the portal. Those are available for 119 of the 120 counties. The only one that it's not available is Jefferson County for Louisville. And the reason it's not available is because Louisville MSD already does that themselves. So we didn't want to recreate the wheel for something they already had. Going forward, though, with the flood hazard portal, some of the things we want to put on there are, so we talked about that flood risk information earlier. We would like to make some of that information available either through the portal or through one of our other web maps. And then we also want to start putting dam safety information on there, letting people know, hey, here's where areas of high, moderate, and low hazard dams are. If you live downstream, you may want to be aware of what would happen if the dam failed or something like that. So you may not necessarily live in a floodplain itself, but it is still good risk communication information to provide to people. So some of the key functions that the flood hazard portal allows you to do is, one, like I said, it shows you Kentucky-specific floodplain maps versus everything for the nation. You can look at the different floodplains on several different base maps. So FEMA had aerial imagery or street maps. We have that as well, but you can also look at things like shading or topo maps. Other different maps are available as well. You can find the base flood elevations in A zones for 119 of the 120 counties in Kentucky. And again, that's something that the Map Service Center cannot do at this time. And then you can download the effective models. So making that available to surveyors or engineers or developers that are interested in it. It's available without having to contact anybody at the division. You can go online and download it yourself. So it doesn't look like we had any additional questions coming in, guys. So we're going to go ahead and jump into the demo on the flood hazard portal. So when you go there, guys, the website for the portal is watermaps.ky.gov, watermaps.ky.gov/risk-portal, P-O-R-T-A-L. If you go there, this is what it's going to look like when you first pull it up. First thing you're going to see every time you go to this web address is there's a disclaimer box that's going to pop up every single time. I do want to call your attention to something in the disclaimer box. The very first sentence there in bold: the flood hazard portal is best viewed in Google Chrome, Mozilla Firefox, or Apple Safari. Right now, for whatever reason, the portal doesn't work real well or doesn't play real well with Internet Explorer. That's something we're trying to work on and fix. But right now, it's best if you use Chrome, Firefox, or Safari whenever you're looking at the flood maps themselves. Additionally, that second line, due to the size of the maps, it does not work well on smartphones or mini tablets. Our next phase of the portal, we actually plan to make it mobile friendly. So you're going to be able to look at that on your cell phone and just hit find my location or something like that. But right now, it works best on one of those 3 web browsers on your computer. So every time you go to the portal, you're going to have to hit accept on this disclaimer, just being aware that you know, this map is the best available data. Number one thing I want to call your attention to, guys, is all the counties shaded in green. Again, 119 of the 120 counties in Kentucky have the base flood elevations in A zones available. All the counties in green have that. The one that doesn't is Louisville. So everywhere this is available, and this is actually a recent feature. You know, up about a year ago, we were still adding counties to the portal. That only recently got finished last August or September. So it's not been that long that the entire state has been available. So similar to the Map Service Center here in the top right, you actually have a search feature. So you, same way as before, you can search by street address, by lat long, by area name, things like that. So just same as before, we're going to search for Frankfort, Kentucky, just to be consistent. And we're going to hit search, and it's going to zoom me into City of Frankfort, just like the Map Service Center does. And one of the first things you should notice, guys, is the floodplains look exactly the same as they do on the Map Service Center. We are actually pulling data from the same place that FEMA is pulling data. So the flood maps are going to be identical. Every night at midnight, you're going to have the most accurate maps. So you know, there should be no discrepancy from one website to the other. Similar as before, you can zoom using the scroll function on your mouse, or you can use that plus or minus button there in the top left-hand corner and go in and actually look at different areas we're interested in. Same way as with FEMA, you have the different base maps. There's just more of them. So in the top right-hand corner, that switch base map button, we can actually click that, and there are several different base maps that we can actually look at this information on. So if we wanted to look at it for street maps, for example, you can actually do that. The one it's going to default to, though, every time is that Kentucky base map. That's the one that's going to start at. As you're farther out, it's going to be a street map, and then as you zoom in, it's going to show you aerial imagery. So you can actually start to see individual buildings, parking lots, cars, boat docks, things of that nature. One of the coolest features that I don't think a lot of people really know about on the flood hazard portal is there on the left-hand side, guys. There's two things I want to call your attention to. The first one is every one of these layers has a little checkbox next to it. And what that means is that that layer is turned on. But you can actually go in and turn certain layers off depending on whether or not you're interested in seeing them right now. So for example, this red line and that red writing, that's our panel information for the different firm panels for Frankfurt. I can actually go over here to the left side, click that check marks, and turn those off, and you'll actually see it disappear off the map. So I can turn layers on and off depending on what I'm actually interested in seeing. The other really cool feature in this layers box is that here near the top, there's actually a slider bar. So you'll notice here near that red dot, it can be a little difficult to see what we're looking at. You know, that map is a little busy, a little hard to interpret. So one of the things that that slider bar allows you to do is you can click and drag it and change the transparency of the layers on the map. So as I drag this little box from right to left, you should notice that the map becomes easier to read. So you can actually see through the different floodplain layers. And then as I pull it back farther to the right, the floodplain layers come more back into focus. So that can really be a helpful feature when you're trying to find, is this corner of the building touching, yes or no? You can slide that up and down to get a better reference for different areas you're looking at. That's something not a lot of people are aware that the portal does. So I want to show you guys an example of finding a base flood elevation. So I'm going to zoom out a little bit. And we're going to go up here upstream a little bit, just outside of Frankfurt, and look at Benson Creek. This is a good example where on one part of the creek you have an AE zone, and on another part of the creek you have a zone A. So bear with me as I get there. Okay, so this is Benson Creek. This is just outside of Frankfurt, like I said. And you'll notice there on the right-hand side, you've got a zone AE. It's actually listed here on the map itself. Sorry. It's actually listed on the map itself. And then the area in the floodway is shown in that red and blue hash mark, again, labeled zone AE. And then here we have cross-section G on Benson Creek. That's the end of the study. That's where the end of the real high detail study area ends. Zone A is still floodplains. The difference between the two is the level of study and engineering that's gone into them. So again, on the right-hand side, Zone AE base flood elevations aren't available on the portal. They're already available in the Map Service Center in that flood insurance study. So if you click around on there, you'll notice no information comes up. That's because, like I said, we didn't want to recreate the wheel whenever we were putting the service together. FEMA already had that information available, so we didn't want to go ahead and put it in there again. On the left, though, you'll notice the A zone. This is where you can get your base flood elevation. So just immediately upstream where that AE zone ends, we can click that stream center line and actually see where I clicked. The base flood elevation is 517.9 feet above sea level. And as you move upstream, you know, water flows downhill, so the base flood elevation changes as you move up and downstream. So you'll notice every time I click and that box moves, that base flood elevation is a little bit different. Sometimes it's, you know, 1/10 of a foot difference. Sometimes it can be several feet difference. Just depends on what the ground looks like in that area. The other thing I want to call your attention to while I have this results box pulled up is I mentioned before you can actually download information off the portal itself. So in A zones, you can actually go in and click stream center line, and then you'll notice below that base flood elevation, there's a download model here button. We can actually go in and click that button. Again, another disclaimer pops up. If you accept the disclaimer, hit submit, and you can actually download that information directly for Benson Creek or this area of Franklin County. So you can, that top one is the effective model for Benson Creek. You can actually go on and download that model, and developers or engineers can actually make changes as necessary and submit that information to FEMA for a map update. You can also download the hydrology and hydraulic reports that were used for this area, as well as there's a link here for Franklin County's flood insurance study. So if we're interested in those AE zones, we can actually just click that and it'll take us to the flood insurance study for Franklin County. The last couple things I want to call your attention to, guys, while we're on the flood hazard portal is some useful ones when it comes to understanding it. So on the top left, under the seal, you'll notice there's a user's guide. You can actually click that, download that, and it will walk you through step by step of what the portal is doing, where it's getting that information, and how you can actually use it. On the far right-hand side, the other button I want to call your attention to is the Resources tab. From there are several very helpful links that can send you to different areas. So you can find the local floodplain coordinators there. There are links to the Division of Water's floodplain map and flood hazard pages, things like that that are available as well. It looks like we had a question come in. Abby, what was the question?
Is this the same data as the Kentucky Stream Maintenance Map? The one you're looking at right now.
So I'm not sure about the stream maintenance map. I assume it's the same data. It has the same person over all of the different ArcMap maps. But as far as is this the exact same data, I think so, but I'm not certain. So I don't want to say yes, but I don't want to say no either. Generally, what we use here at the division is the FEMA's National Flood Hazard Layer that I talked about earlier, and that's because FEMA manages all that data for us, and we just pull it and show it in a very usable way. So I think it's the same data, but I'm not 100% certain. Jamie, contact me after the webinar, and I can look into that further for you. All right. So it doesn't look like we had any other questions come in during that. So we're going to go ahead and move on, guys. The next one I want to call your attention to is the Flood Map Updates portal. This is another one of those web maps that are managed by Division of Water. And same way, it's on that DOW Water Maps page. So watermaps.ky.gov. There in the very bottom center in that red box, you can actually see where it's located at on the page. So if you go there, it's just the very bottom center, FEMA Flood Map Updates. When you go there, the Flood Maps portal allows us to show you where the maps are changing. So I mentioned before, Division of Water, we're FEMA's cooperating technical partner. We're updating the maps kind of on their behalf. Towards the end of that process, we know where the maps are going to change. We kind of know what they're going to look like, but we want other people to take a look at them and see if there are any errors or mistakes we made. So this map update portal allows us to put that information out there, and people in the public or people from the local communities to go on and very easily view where the map changes are coming. If you go there right now, this picture in the top right is what it looks like. There are currently 4 different areas where there are preliminary maps available. And they are Jefferson County, which is Louisville, Silver Little Watershed, which is Oldham and Trimble counties, and I believe Henry and Carroll, just a little bit of them. Lower Cumberland Watershed, there are 2 counties there that are having new maps still in the process, and then Spencer County. All of those have preliminary maps available. So if you go there, you can actually look and see what those maps are going to look like when they go effective. So you can actually go and see, hey, what are they like today, and what are they going to look like here in a couple months when these maps go into effect? And these are only for FYI purposes. They're only there to kind of give you a better understanding of what's coming down the pipe. Because eventually these maps are going to go into effect and they're going to be used for regulatory decisions, for permitting, for insurance, for, lenders are going to use them, things like that. That's coming. So people can see ahead of time what it's going to look like when they come into effect. But again, they're not regulatory effective. They're only there for, informational purposes. The other beautiful part about this flood map updates portal is, seeing the maps are great, but a lot of times what people really care about is just where the changes are happening. So one of the things we're able to do is just show where the changes are occurring since the last flood insurance rate map, so since the last firm. So you can see in that picture in the bottom right-hand corner of your screen the changes since last firm. The unshaded areas wasn't in the floodplain before, they're not in the floodplain now. The areas shaded in gray, they were in the floodplain before, they're still in the floodplain. They don't have any changes. The areas I want to call your attention to, though, are those colored areas, the red, blue, green, and yellow colors. These are areas where the floodplains are either getting bigger or they're getting smaller based on better information. For this example, this map in Louisville, those two areas circled in purple, the red coloring there are areas where the floodplain, the regulatory floodplain is getting bigger. So people who live in those areas are going to be required to get flood insurance when the maps go into effect. So it really allows you to see where is it getting bigger, where is it getting smaller. Same way, the areas below that in blue are areas where the 1% chance floodplain is actually shrinking a little bit. So those areas are, currently have to get permits and carry insurance, but when they go into effect, no longer have to. It's optional, you still can, but it's not required anymore. So it really allows you to see where the changes are occurring. This is a very underutilized tool, I feel like, in areas where the maps are changing. So some of the key functions that the flood map updates portal does is, one, it allows you to communicate that the maps are changing and to show citizens what it's going to look like. These maps are online, they're available in a digital format, so they can go there themselves and take a look at them. Or you can share them on social media, through your local websites, email, however you want to do it with just hyperlinks, same way you would any other website. The other beautiful part is, again, you can show just where the changes are occurring. So it allows for communities, if you want, to do targeted outreach campaigns. Areas where the floodplains are getting bigger, you can let people know, hey, if you buy flood insurance now, it's going to be cheaper for you in the long run because you're currently not mapped in. When these maps come into effect, you're going to pay actuarial rates, and it's going to be much more expensive than it is today. Same way, you can let people know, hey, you're not in the floodplain, and eventually you will be. You're going to require permits and things like that going forward. So it doesn't look like we had any questions come in, guys. So we're going to go ahead and skip forward onto the demonstration. So we're going to go to the water maps page. So again, when you first go there, it's going to say Kentucky Division Water Maps portal there across the top. For flood maps, remember, it's the one in the very bottom center, FEMA Flood Map Project Updates. We can click that map, and it's actually going to open in the new tab. So you'll notice I can still go back to the page I was at before, but it's going to open in a new tab for me. And again, as I mentioned before, there are currently 4 maps available. So you can see Jefferson County, Silver Little, Lower Cumberland, and Spencer County maps all on there available. To show you guys what it looks like, we're going to go in and actually look at the Lower Cumberland map. So this is 2 counties there in the Lower Cumberland watershed near Lake Barkley that are in the process of getting new flood maps. When you go there, it takes a second to load. This is ArcMap Online, so it's going to take a second or 2 to load. So don't panic if it's not there right away when you first go there. It's coming. But you can see here, those areas in blue are areas where the flood maps are being updated. On the left-hand side, you can see we have a legend there for Crittenden County and Livingston County. The 2 maps are 2 counties being updated. Same way as before, here in the top right, we've got our search bar where we can search for an area if we're interested in only a specific house or a specific address. Same way as before, just above that, we have the different base maps available. Again, several different options we can pick from, so we can look at whatever the maps on whatever we want to see, no problem. For this example, though, we're going to go down to right about where the Cumberland River meets. So we're going to zoom in here a little bit. Bear with me. All right. So we can see the flood maps of what they're going to be looking like. Here in the top right-hand corner, though, so if you want to see where the changes are happening, here in the top right-hand corner, we can actually click the layer list, and it's going to tell us all the different counties and layers that are available. So for Livingston County, I'm actually going to turn off what the new maps are going to look like, and I only want to see the changes since last firm. So I only want to see where the change areas are going to look like. And when we go back to the map, you can actually see the different colors of where the maps are changing. So the red is where the floodplain is getting bigger. The blue is where the floodplain is getting smaller. And then the yellow is going to be actually where the 500-year, that 0.2% chance floodplain is getting smaller. So you can see there's a certain area here where there's going to be a lot of change, a lot of movement. So the people from the county can actually go out and talk to individual property owners or send letters and emails and things like that to individual property owners saying, hey, do you realize this is coming, and talk to them. So if you were the property owner here, currently you're not in the floodplain, but when the new maps go into effect, if you have a mortgage, you're going to be required to carry flood insurance. And so by letting people know on the front end, hey, these changes are coming, and it's better if you go ahead and do this now to save yourself money in the later, is way better than letting people be blindsided after the maps go into effect. So that's it for these preliminary map viewers, guys. Does anybody have any questions before I move on? Okay, doesn't look like it. So we're going to go ahead and just keep trucking. So the last one, guys, I want to talk today about are the flood risk products. This one is kind of in a unique category. It's done by the Division of Water, since we are the cooperating technical partner for FEMA. Again, FEMA gives us funding, and we're actually the ones going out and creating the flood maps for all the map updates in Kentucky. This is actually called risk map, is the process of updating the maps. It's risk mapping, assessment, and planning. So we're actually in the process of remapping all the watersheds in the Commonwealth. The main reason is risk changes over time. You know, new buildings go in, new roads, things happen, things change. So risk changes. And we want to know where those changes are so we can better communicate that to people, but then also be able to better communicate, hey, here's things you can do to mitigate that risk. During this risk map update, there are two different types of maps that are created. The first one is ones we've been very extensively talking about so far. These are the regulatory products. So this is those flood insurance rate maps that are available through the Map Service Center that we showed earlier. You can view them on the Map Service Center or the Kentucky Flood Hazard Portal, as well as the flood insurance study, why those maps look the way they look. These are the ones we use to make regulatory decisions. So when are permits required? When is insurance required? You know, what is your insurance rate? Things like that. Every community, when these maps are updated, they get a printed copy, but they're also made available online. The other type of map that we're creating now, and this has been a recent thing in the last 3 to 5 years, are what they call flood risk products. These are specifically geared towards risk communication, not, you know, regulation decisions. So this is specifically geared towards, you know, making people better informed than the flood insurance rate maps can, you know, necessarily do by themselves. And I'm going to go through a couple examples. These aren't available online yet, but if you have ArcMap, this information is available for download. We'll talk about that in a second. So one of the maps we actually make available is what's called the 1% annual chance depth grid. When we make these maps, we know the ground elevation accurate to within a couple inches usually. And we know what the water elevation is going to be for that site. So what this map is really showing you is what's the difference between those two. Any area with no coloring, you know, the ground elevation is above the flood elevation, so it's a low risk area. Any area with any kind of heat map shading, that red, orange, yellow, green, blue, that's actually showing how deep the water is during the 1% chance flood, during that 100-year flood. So you can actually go in on these maps and click certain areas, and it will tell you how deep the water is going to be during that 100-year flood. And it really changes how people perceive the flood when you tell them, hey, the water is going to be 487.3 feet above sea level. That doesn't mean much to people. They don't know where their house sits in relation to sea level. But if you told them, hey, at the front steps of your house during the 100-year flood, you can expect 3.5 feet of water, you know, most people, they know what their house looks like. 3.5 feet of water. Oh my gosh, I'm going to have water in my living room. What can I do about this? So it really changes how people perceive the flood risk to themselves. It really puts them in perspective of something they can understand. Another one they create is the percent annual chance map. So for the NFIP, we regulate the 1% or greater chance flood. And that's really all the flood insurance rate map is telling you is this area in blue has a greater than 1% chance of flooding in a given year. But certain areas there, as you get closer and farther from the stream, that chance of flooding can go up or down. So what this map is actually showing is showing you that. So what are your percent chance of flooding in a given year? So for example, in this trailer park here in northern Kentucky, you can actually go in and look at and see these areas in yellow. You have about a 1% chance. Areas in gold, 2 to 3% chance. Areas in teal, 5 to 6% chance. And these areas up here in dark blue, you're having as high as a 9 or 10% chance of a flood happening any given year. But on the flood insurance rate map, they're all shown as 1% or greater. So this really does say, hey, look, you're in a low-lying area compared to some of the areas around you. You really need to rethink about what you're doing to protect yourself. The other one we're creating is the percent chance of flooding over a 30-year period. This one was picked pretty obviously because 30 years is the length of a typical mortgage. So when people are buying or selling a house, whenever you're talking to a loan officer, it can talk to you about what your flood risk is while you have that loan. So you're able to actually go in and look at specific areas. So the building there at the end of that black arrow, that little house there, it's shown in red. It has a 95.8% chance of flooding in a given 30-year period. So it has almost a 96% chance of being affected by a flood before it pays off its mortgage. Its neighbor immediately to the east, being shown there in blue, it's being touched by that blue area. That's a low area, 5.8% chance, or almost a 6% chance of flooding during 30 years. The house directly to the left of that other one, kind of shown in that yellow gold area, that's about a 70 to 75% chance of flooding. So 3 neighbors, 3 houses sitting directly in a row on the same street have vastly different chances of a flood happening in a given year. And this map allows you to show that on an individual house-by-house, case-by-case basis. As we update these maps, it's a long cycle. Putting the preliminary maps together takes anywhere from 2 to 3 years. Then there's a due process phase where it goes out for public notice and review. Then there's a 6-month compliance period. So really, you're talking anywhere from 3 to 5 years from start to finish that flood maps take. To give you guys an example of where some of these products are currently available or where they will shortly be available, all the watersheds shown in green are areas where we've already deployed RiskMap or where we're currently working. So areas where we've already updated the maps and these are available, or where we're currently putting them together for you. This area, these colors shown in yellow, red, and blue, these are areas where we plan to be working or starting to work here in the next 1 to 3 years. So really showing you the areas where we're really filling in the gaps between this green and where we haven't got to yet. So we really want to update the flood maps for Kentucky every 5 to 10 years is our goal. So if these products aren't necessarily available for you, be patient. They are coming, and when they do, we're hoping to have them in a format that are going to be easy to use online versus currently they're only available through ArcMap. But you can go to the Map Service Center. I mentioned earlier before in those flood risk products there under the Show All Products button, you can go and download that information today if you have ArcMap. Wrapping up, guys, there are a couple other pages that I want to talk about. These aren't necessarily tools, but they're more geared toward helping people understand and explain what they're seeing when they're looking at the flood maps. So recently, Division of Water, we actually updated our webpage, and there's a whole page now designed just for Find Your Flood Zone. It's really there to explain what the different flood zones mean, to educate people. Certain sections of it are made for lay people, whereas other ones are made for more power users. So some of the different topics it covers is what do the flood zone means, how the maps can communicate risk to people, how you can go online and view and use the maps, what the process is for changing the maps, and then actually where you can go and download the data. So if you're looking for a model in an AE zone versus an A zone, things like that, you can actually go and actually download that data on there. If you go to the website eec.ky.gov and then search flood in that search bar in the top right-hand corner, like I said, Find Your Flood Zone page is there available. Looks like we had a question come in, so I'm going to backtrack just a little bit, guys. The question is, does it show when prelim maps may complete their 6-month compliance period? It doesn't, because that changes as they go along. But there will be an official letter sent to everybody from FEMA to the local CEO, mayor, or judge, saying compliance period starts today. And when that happens, guys, you're going to hear from me a lot. Part of my job is to help you incorporate those maps into your local ordinance. So you're going to hear from me every about week or two during that entire 6-month period to make sure that your maps or your ordinance is including those new maps and when you can start using them. So good question. But getting back to it, guys, like I said, eec.ky.gov, search flood, and then it's the Find Your Flood Zone page. Additionally, to help everybody understand some of these different map tools and map products, we put together what we call a Viewing and Using Digital Flood Maps Guide. This actually goes into 8 different flood map tools. So all the ones we covered today, plus a couple additional ones, are given a good overview in this guide that includes images showing what they look like as you're using them. So you can have the guide in front of you and then the maps open in a web browser or downloading them or using them in ArcMap, and it's showing you what it should look like. And so if you're having problems, it can help you, problem solve as you go. For those of you that have ArcMap and are interested in using that national flood hazard layer I talked about earlier, there's actually a step-by-step process for adding that server or adding that information into ArcMap in there. It's a 6-step process. It's very simple. If you have problems, though, we have people at the Division of Water that can help you do that. But if you go to that Find Your Flood Zone page, you can actually download that guide today. So there in that web page on the right-hand side, you see viewing using digital flood maps. You can click that and download the guide in a PDF, and it's right there for you. And this is what that guide looks like when you get it. I try to update it frequently just to make sure that it doesn't get dated, that hyperlinks still work, things like that. So we try to keep it updated pretty frequently. The last one I want to talk to you guys about, though, is floodsmart.gov. This is a website that's put together by FEMA for the National Flood Insurance Program that's really geared towards consumers of flood insurance. So really talking to them about what their flood risk is and how do they reduce it or mitigate that through either mitigation actions or flood insurance. So it has topics on there about why buy or renew flood insurance, how to buy and renew, understanding the costs that go into your flood insurance policy and things you can do to reduce that cost, and then things to do before and after a flood. Additionally, there's also a page on this floodsmart.gov that is specifically geared towards insurance agents. So if you know insurance agents in your community that deal with flood insurance policies, they can go to floodsmart.gov, and there in the top right-hand corner, you'll see that red box that says For Agents. That has a completely different set of topics, such as how to explain it in a clear and concise manner, how to make sure they're getting all the coverage they need, things like that. So there's a lot out there. The last thing I want to leave you guys with, so I've thrown a lot at you here in the last about hour and a half. So the number one thing I want to tell you guys with the, using and viewing these flood maps, using these tools, communicating risk to people is don't panic. if you have problems, if you have questions, if you're not sure what something means, please get a hold of me or get a hold of somebody here at the Division of Water. We're more than happy to help you guys. So this is my contact info. That's my email and my direct line. I do highly recommend, if you're going to get a hold of me, to email me. I'm out in the field frequently, so I only check my voicemail occasionally. So it might be a little bit before I get back to you if you leave me a voicemail, but I usually return all my emails every day. Or you can contact the general contact email or phone number for the Division of Water, and actually they will direct your question to the appropriate people. So water@ky.gov is a great place to start if you don't know what you don't know. With that, guys, that kind of wraps up my presentation. I don't have any additional slides. Does look like we had 1 or 2 questions come in, so I'm going to go ahead and answer those. So the question is, did FEMA implement this program before or after HAZUS program for flooding, or did this program stem from HAZUS in regard to the flood maps? I'm not really sure what you're talking about when you say this program, Sharana. So if you could clarify in the comment box for me, that would be great. I do know FEMA and us at the Division of Water, we're trying to be knowledgeable about what the industry is doing as far as how they're viewing and using the models and things like that. So we're trying to make the products as user-friendly as we can, but also providing the most accurate and up-to-date information that we can to people. So I'm not really sure which program you're talking about in particular, but like I said, I do know FEMA as far as the flood map updates and things like that, and then us at the division through Risk Map, through our portal, through the Map Service Center, National Flood Hazard Alert, things like that. We're trying to make them work with HAZUS. The flooding maps and models for the public, if that helps. Yeah. So again, like we're trying to make them as user-friendly as possible, and then we're trying to make the models available. So the HAZUS models, you can get the A-zone ones from the Flood Hazard Portal. The AE ones are actually available on a website called the Mapping Information Platform, or MIP, M-I-P. You can actually download the models there as well. Okay, guys, so I'm going to stick around here for a minute or two. So if anybody has more questions, please go ahead and send them in the chat feature. But that kind of wraps up the presentation I had for everybody. So I want to say thank you for coming, spending an hour and a half with me. And if you have more problems or questions, please reach out. Please get a hold of me. I'm happy to help. All right, guys. Thank you very much, and everybody have a pleasant day. Thanks.